Everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody hear me okay?
Perfect.
We can hear you fine, and everybody else should mute their mic so the presentation doesn't get interrupted.
Only but Charlie.
Okay, well, it's great to be here. I wish we were in person, but this will have to do. I didn't have a lot of time to change my presentation, so this is, for the most part, what I would do with the schools. So I know a lot of you have seen my presentation, so just bear with me. But on behalf of Freedom Committee, my name is Senior Chief Gary Tegel, and I served on and off for 32 years. And so I'm just going to go over my history a bit before I get started on my military. So I'm a youngster. I was actually born in 1962. I was a twin, born in Santa Ana, at Santa Ana Community Hospital. That's a picture of me and my brother. What I would tell you is the only reason I'm in Orange County today is because of World War II. My family, both my mom and dad, were from the South. My mom was from Oklahoma. They came out here in the summer of '41. Of course, in December, they bombed Pearl Harbor. My grandfather, being a farmer, they lived in Westminster. And Westminster, the farmers were all, majority were Japanese. And so a lot of them got taken away to internment camps. So my grandfather, he wanted to join the war effort, but he had polio when he was a child. But he got a job with the South Coast Company, which, as you look at this picture here, that's the Newport Pier. And right down here in Newport Harbor, they built Navy ships right in Newport Harbor. So my grandfather was a welder for the DOD, building patrol craft and minesweepers. That's an example of one of the ships they built down there. If you go to Spaghetti Factory, right behind Spaghetti Factory in Newport Beach is South Coast Shipyard. That's approximately where the location was. This is one of the types of gunboats that they built down there in Newport Harbor. So I know that surprises a lot of kids when I tell them. The military was right down there in Newport Beach. My dad, he had a farm in Texas. He was a little bit older. He was 23 when he went into service. And so he left the farm in Texas and went to Fort Minter up by Bakersfield to go to airplane mechanic school. But once again, as the needs of the Army Air Corps, he was sent to the Santa Ana Army Air Base. As you well know, they opened up the Heroes Hall over there at the air base, or at the old Santa Ana Army Air Base. I went to the opening and I brought this picture. Here's a picture of my dad, and as you can see, the building here was one of the originals that they had there. So as I tell the kids, it's hard to imagine the scope. Many of you live or visit Costa Mesa, or even where we have our meeting was actually where the base was. And so the footprint of the Santa Ana Army Air Base was, in essence, Baker to Harbor to Newport to Bristol. That big square was all fenced off and was the base. So if you can imagine, when the guys got a pass, what they would do is they would cruise down to Newport and look for girls. Imagine that. And so I would ask the kids at this point how old my mom looks in this picture. This is my mom and dad's wedding picture. They got married when she was 16 years old. And so my family's been around Newport Beach for quite some time. After the war, they went back to Texas for a time. But after a year and a half or so, they came back. They had some rough times trying to get the farm back in shape, and it was a drought year. So my mom said, we're going back to Newport. They came back and bought a home in Newport Heights. Up in the upper right is my brother Bob, who's on the call today. And he served in the Navy, and then he went on to work for the post office for 40 years. On the left-hand side is my brother Larry. he was in the Navy as well. Bob was a yeoman. Larry was a damage controlman. And he came back and worked for the Newport Beach Fire Department for 31 years. My dad got a job with the city when they came back to California, and he worked for 38 and a half years for the city of Newport Beach and utilities. And as you hear that I was reserved for a good majority of my time, I worked in the water utility field for 32 years, my last 20 years with the city of Newport Beach, who was a great company to work for and supported my military service greatly. Schools, I was a local guy, which is always fun because I get to go back to Ensign and Harbor and talk to the kids about my service time. I went to Newport Heights Elementary, and then as I tell the kids, I was a Seavey and a sailor before I ever went in the Navy, because the mascots of my junior high were the Ensign Seaveys and the Newport Harbor High Sailors. But I didn't like school too much. A couple things that I did like, I liked sports. We were fortunate to have a really nice machine shop in junior high and high school. In high school, we had a lot of the World War II surplus lace and drill press and grinders. So we did a lot of metal work and whatnot. And then my brother, being a firefighter in Newport, I started working with the Newport Beach Fire Explorers, which was the Explorer program is kind of like it's through the Boy Scouts. And basically, I could do, after qualified, I could do ride-alongs with the fire department. I had about 700 hours in high school riding along with the fire department. And if you can imagine, I used to ride on the back of the tailboard of the fire engine with a leather strap around my waist. But I rather liked that lifestyle of the fire department. So why did I enlist? I didn't want to go to school, college. I had been working odd jobs. I worked in the food industry. I worked at a drugstore. I worked busting tires. I wasn't really thrilled about any of those jobs. And, the Navy slogan was not just jobs of adventure. And my brothers and my father set that course before me, serving in the military. And I went down to Santa Ana to join the military, and they had a job in the Navy that fit the things that I like to do, the metalworking and the firefighting, which was called the hull maintenance technician, which I'll get into in a minute. Early days of service, so next week, it will be 40 years since I signed up for the Navy. So on July 17th, I signed up for the Navy, enlisted, and went to boot camp in San Diego, which is mostly just a dream now. About the only thing left is down there is the ship that never went to sea, the training ship down there. And this is a picture of the barracks. So the bunks we have there, I always tell the kids, the little locker, everything had to be folded just right, and if it wasn't, they would rip it out of the locker and you'd have to start all over, fold it up, and you thought it was just the dumbest thing in the world. And yet, when you get out to your ship, guess what? How big the lockers are. Very small area to put your clothing. So at least we learned how to fold our clothes. And so I relate that to the kids in the fact that through life they may have to do things that they don't understand, like algebra, but there might be some purpose for it sometime in the future. Growing up in Newport, we didn't have much diversity. I'd say we were about 99.9% white in our school and around my neighborhood. So when I went to boot camp, it was a little bit of culture shock, but one thing about boot camp, they shave your head and they give you all the same uniforms. And, I remember my chief said, I don't care if you're black or brown or orange or green, you all bleed red and you're all sailors, so you're going to act accordingly. And so that was pretty neat. But just getting to learn some of the different cultures and people from different parts of the country. But then then they sent me to A school. My A school was in Philadelphia. That was culture shock for me. The big city. It was. I spent 3 months there, and basically we learned our craft. So we learned welding, pipe fitting, ship fitting, and then, as you know, in the Marine Corps, they say every Marine is a rifleman. Well, in the Navy, if you're on board a ship, every sailor is a fireman, firefighter. Damage control is huge. And so we learned that craft not only to lead the different damage control parties on the ship, but we had to teach every single sailor that came on board their jobs, should we get into any battle damage, or, as you know, many of the ships, we have fires sometimes on a daily basis, especially on the aircraft carrier. And so everybody has a job, and everybody needs to be trained to do the job effectively. They give you a dream sheet when you're in boot camp, and I asked to go to Japan, Hawaii, or San Diego. I got my third choice of San Diego. But fortunately, I got on the USS Fox, and I'll just shout out a plug. I don't think he's on the call right now, but George Chambers was a plank owner on this ship, the USS Fox. So we share that in common. I served on board the USS Fox for a few years. When I first got on board, they were getting ready to deploy on a Western Pacific deployment. So I did a lot of steaming on the ship, a lot of sea time. And honestly, this is a guided missile cruiser. This is definitely a war machine right here. We had the missile launcher, we had torpedoes, we had a 5-inch 54 caliber on the rear of the ship. It was just an amazing. And then later on, they actually put the phalanx, which is the basically a Gatling gun. We also could carry a helicopter. And so I really enjoyed my tour. They always say your first ship is your first love, and really just a beautiful ship. And spent a lot of time on our Westpac. We did quite a bit of cruising and steaming. It was during the time when the Persian Gulf was pretty heated up with the Iran-Iraq war. And so we spent a lot of time in the Persian Gulf escorting ships and keeping the shipping lanes open. So I think in my first cruise, we did 10 months at sea, and I think I saw land maybe about 20 days in that time frame. Once we got back, and late in 1982, shortly after that, we went to Long Beach into the shipyards. And I'm going home every night to Newport, to my folks' house, and I'm like, man, I joined the Navy to see the world. So I submitted a transfer, a non-negotiated swap with another sailor. And so I ended up finding somebody that wanted to come back to the States, and I got to go on board the USS Stockton. This was a converted destroyer escort. It was a fast frigate, and mostly it was stationed out of Yokosuka, Japan. So I lived in Japan for a few years, and that was a really good tour as well. We did most of our steaming around Japan, Philippines, Korea, and other ports in Japan. Life at sea, John Paul Jones said it best. Life at sea is a little bit like being in jail, only the likelihood of drowning is a lot higher. And so some days it was calm and flat. Some days it was rock and roll. You know, you're walking on the bulkhead and you see footprints halfway up the wall. Some days you feel like you're going through the water like a submarine, like down on the lower part of the screen. But for me, most of my time was spent down in engineering as repair work. Most of the repair work we were doing was down in the engine rooms and fire rooms on the ship. A couple things I tried to do at sea was to always be up when the sun came up and always go out until the sun set. There's not much like that at sea. It's beautiful. Some of the kids sometimes ask me what my scariest time was. besides being in Iraq, that was kind of a daily thing. But up here on the upper left-hand side, is a 5-inch 54 caliber gun mount, and we were taking. We were at sea. We had lost one of our engines, so we only had one screw, and we were taking 30-plus foot swells. And it was very difficult time at sea. We were listing or taking a list of 40-plus degrees. It was getting close to where the captain came on board the 1MC, or the speaker system throughout the ship, and he said, basically at 46 or 47 degree roll, the gun mount has breakaway bolts. And as you know, the ships, or you may not know, but a ship from the main deck below is steel, from the main deck above is aluminum, and that's so you don't go over. But basically, he said the gun mount will fall off at a 46 degree roll, and if not, we'll just go all the way around, but we'll come back up again. So if you're on our watch, go strap yourself in your racks and just to be safe out there. And so, but we made it through, but it's a scary time at sea sometimes. Never know what you're gonna encounter. Some of the other pictures are just working on the ship, and down here in the lower right-hand corner, I would say these are a couple guys that I still keep in contact today. This picture is 40 years old, so but I also take the opportunity to tell kids that today we have instant contact with people through Facebook, or even deployed, there's Skype, or there's, like we're doing today with Zoom. But back in the day, the only way that we heard from family and friends was through what I call snail mail, or just getting a letter. And sometimes that took months at sea to get a letter. As you know, sailors can be jokesters. Just a quick side note, one of the funny things we would do to new kids coming on board, we would send them out with a life jacket and a hook and say, okay, you got the mail buoy watch, and when the buoy comes by, you got to grab the mail bag, and you better not miss it, because then the captain will have to turn the ship around. And boy, sometimes I saw guys fall for that and stand out there for hours with that hook, and pretty mean, but you got to do stuff that breaks up the monotony sometimes. So just to show the kids, being at sea for long periods of time, how do you get your supplies? So we have unwrap and vert wrap. As you know, like Bob Olds used to be the commanding officer of oiler. But basically, we would pull up next to the oiler, and we would shoot a line across, bring the hose across, and then fill the tanks. And then being in engineering, we also would have many jobs. Most everybody had a job during that evolution, but we would have to ballast the tanks so the ship wouldn't go through the water, listing to one side or the other. We'd have to test the fuel to make sure there was no water in it, that it was satisfactory to pump aboard. And then there was vert wrap, or vertical replenishment. Now, we always knew when it was time for vert wrap, because on board ship, when you start drinking powdered milk and eating powdered eggs and no fruits and vegetables, you knew it was time to get a vert wrap, so we could get some fresh fruit and vegetable and eggs and milk. But those guys were a lifesaver when we knew we were going to do unwrap. So most of my time was in the Cold War, so I talked to the kids about what the Cold War is and ask them if they know what it is. And so basically I just tell them, for my part in the military, it's mostly post-World War II until the wall came down in Berlin. And it was against Russia for the most part for us. I tell them today, I think there's a Cold War going on today. And much as we might not like to think that, but I think we are in some sort of a Cold War today. But part of the time frame that I was in, it was a nuclear arms race. And basically, these are some stats when I was in. The USA had 8,000 ICBM missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and Russia had 7,000. The US had 4,000 planes capable of delivering a nuclear bomb, and Russia had 5,000. It was always like a little game to get the most. Who had the most? And every time we were at sea, we always played this little cat and mouse game during the Cold War. Whenever we were deployed or traveling, we would oftentimes encounter these little Russian fishing trolling boats, and but basically they were spy ships. They had antennas, and they would follow us and dig through our trash to see what our mission is, where we were going, what we were doing. And then at times we had MiGs come over. I remember one time being in the Persian Gulf, we had an Iranian MiG jam our radars. Now, if you're an American ship in international waters, that commanding officer had every right to blow that guy out of the sky, because he was locked on with his missiles and jammed our radar. And so he didn't do that, but that's how that tense times were, the Cold War. Sometimes I tell the kids maybe stories about the Cuban Missile Crisis and how close we came to getting into it with Russia over that. And then, anyways, this was a picture from my first ship, the USS Fox. I actually took this picture, and this is our ASROC missile launcher, and basically that missile right there has nuclear capability. So I can tell you this today because they don't do it today, but basically before deployment, we would run right down to Seal Beach, Naval Weapons Station. So sometimes if you're going down Coast Highway and you see the Navy ships right there in Seal Beach, before deployment, we would always go and get our weaponry, and we would get our nuclear capable warheads to take with us on deployment. So if you can imagine, we shot that missile right there. That's a $350,000 back in 1982. And that was without the nuclear, of course, warhead. Another thing I talk about during the Cold War was not only did we have the Korean War conflict, but we had Vietnam. And my part in talking about Vietnam was, even in 1982, many years after the fall of Saigon, the South Vietnamese people did not like communism, and they were trying to escape their country. And so what they would do is the people from South Vietnam, they would pack up, they would sell everything they owned in gold, silver. They'd pack on these little boats, and they'd go out and try and get out into the shipping lane. Now, this particular ship we picked up, they had 53 refugees. Many of them were dehydrated. But basically, right as they get off the coast of South Vietnam, heading for the shipping lanes, the majority of them were attacked by pirates, this boat included. They would steal all the gold and silver, take all their food and water, rape the women. And so the state of these people that had been floating around at sea for 5 days with no food, water, they were pretty bad shape. But we brought them all on board. We took them to Singapore and dropped them off as they were wishing, so they can gain asylum within the country. I always wondered what happened to them. It was kind of neat bringing them on board because we'd been at sea for quite a long time, and they had little kids on board. So it's always fun to have little kids around when you haven't seen kids in forever. And but I always wondered what happened to these people. A few years ago, the USS Fox got an email, and it was this guy just wanted to thank every member on the USS Fox because his wife was one of the kids that were on the ship, and she had made it to the United States, and they had lived a productive life. She became an American citizen. So that was a cool story. For the sake of time, I can't really go over, but after my first tour, I got out of the military and started working for the water department in Costa Mesa, actually, Mesa Water. And but I went in the reserves, and the thing about the reserves, especially back in the early days, I served on all these ships, and we went to sea every month, and so to keep our quals up, and then we would go some points during their deployments to go and help them out during their time at sea. In 2009, I got recalled to active duty. So I basically, by that time, I was a chief petty officer, AD7, and I took a group of 26 members. You may have heard that I got an Army Achievement Medal. It's because we were doing an Army mission in the middle of Iraq. Sometimes people say, where was your ship there in Iraq? And I have to tell them we didn't have ships over there. Iraqi Navy was very small, and but they put us out in the middle of Iraq. I had 26 members from 14 states and plus Puerto Rico, and so we had a lot of diversity and a lot of learning to do to get people all on board to do a mission. They had about 200 Army people doing the mission before, and so I had 26 people to do the same mission. The climate and is way different than the United States over there. Not only is it so hot, but the sand that's over there, it's not like you go down to Newport Beach and the sand is like granulated. It's like a talcum powder. So when the wind blows, it gets into everything. It's miserable. The bottom center picture was what we call T-walls. I happened to be on a base, and at this point in the presentation, I would ask kids, you guys realize how blessed you are to live in this country? And then I'll ask them if they rode their bikes to school, or if they had their parents drive them to school, and they all say yes. And I go, did you get shot at? And they said no. And they said, well, I got shot at every day for a year. Because every day I was in Iraq, we got shot at with mortars, rockets, small arms fire. So around the base, they had these, what they call T-walls, and they would just help for any shrapnel that might come from the mortars and rockets that were coming in. The bottom right-hand corner, that was where I slept for a year, and they had sandbags packed around where I slept. This is one of my docks, and he had the thermostat there. It was 128 degrees. It was hot, and so one of the things we had to do was hydrate. And they had to bring these pallets of water, and they treated the water right on the base. But I grab a case of water probably every other day and just drink water all the time. So we were doing a logistics mission, and basically anything in and out of the country there in Balad, we had hands-on. And one of the things, so just looking at this picture, on the upper left-hand corner of the C-130, they never told us when I first went to Iraq about a combat dive. I didn't know anything about that, and they didn't tell us. And so when we're flying into Iraq, it's about a 20 square mile piece of base there in Balad, and but the insurgents outside the wire would shoot at the planes as they were coming in, and so they would need to do a combat dive. A combat dive, they would use the footprint of the base and spiral down and then level out at the last minute and land on tarmac. And of course, a plane that big, it's not very comfortable, and many of the people started getting sick. And once someone gets sick, someone else will get sick, and it was pretty messy by the time we landed there. And then as soon as we landed, the first place we landed was in Turkey, and we were getting shot at, and the Air Force guy goes to the end of the plane and starts shooting on that fence line, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Where am I headed to here? But anyways, pretty interesting first plane ride into Iraq. On the bottom right-hand corner, those are the MRAP vehicles. When we would do convoys out to the FOBs, or forward operating bases, we would use the MRAPs. These were more advanced than the Humvees. They had a V-shaped bottom in case they got hit with IEDs. On the front there, you'll see they had a magnet that would extend out. And you know, I know one of the things that we talked about with our people when we first got there, you know, the insurgents and the people over there, they may seem like they're backwards and they're poverty, live in poverty and stuff, but they are very ingenious, and they've been warring since King Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible, and they were very rapid to adjust and adapt whenever they figured out what kind of vehicles or things that we were going to use. They would find some way to make it miserable for us. And so these MRAPs, they had a magnet detection on the front that went out about 9 feet. So they plant a roadside bomb in the middle of the road, and as soon as the MRAP would get up to it, they would detonate one on the side road, on the side of the road, about 9 feet back, so it would go in the cab. They had an incendiary delay, and then the device would go off inside the vehicle. And so we had some bad things happen on the road during my time there. On the bottom left-hand corner, that was some of the weapons that they recovered out in the that the Army picked up from insurgents. It was funny, when I first got there, they had a boneyard down there with just old vehicles and planes, and they had a bunch of MiGs that Iraq had, and when Saddam thought that that the Americans were coming, he actually buried some MiG jets on the base, thinking he was gonna dig them up one day and use them again, and I guess that really didn't work out for him. So they had all these old MiG jets out there, and I sent this one back to my old workplace. It says, "Wish you were here." I wouldn't wish anyone to be there, actually, because it was a pretty nasty place over there. So this is just a map. So Baghdad's what most people are familiar with. I was about 15 miles north of Baghdad in Balad. We worked pretty much 6 days a week. I tried to get everybody off on Sunday except for emergencies or some missions that we had to do. But we didn't have a lot of free time. But as you know, and as your mom might have told you, idle hands are the devil's handiwork. And sailors are known to be pretty mischievous. And so basically, I would encourage my people. They had a need at the hospital in Balad. They had a very large hospital that treated all the wounded and then stabilized patients and then sent them off to Ramstein, Germany for extended care. The problem was they didn't have anybody, personnel, to bring people from the helicopters into the hospital or from the hospital out to the C-130s to take them back to Ramstein. So they needed volunteers, and so I encouraged my people to volunteer in the evening times that they were off if they could. It was completely up to them, but I told them it would be a good thing. And and once again, as talking to students, I would say being a good leader is to lead by example. So even though I had a pretty busy job, I actually volunteered to do it. And we had this right before they would bring the gurneys into the hospital. They called it Heroes Highway, and they had draped this very large American flag. And as soon as those soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines that were injured were coming off the helicopters, and mind you, I'm usually the head man pulling the gurney into the hospital, I could see their faces, and as soon as they saw that American flag, even in the evening it was lit up, you could see a peace about them. And just like, I'm going to be okay. I think I'm going to make it. It's going to be okay. And so I tell the kids, the flag, it means a lot to me. And I think it needs to mean a lot to them because, excuse me while I dump that call. I thought I dumped it. Sorry about that. The spammers are busy out there. But the American flag, it means a lot to me, and it should mean a lot to you because a lot of men and women have died and serving our country, and just it means a lot, the flag. And so, as I said, we got mortared often, and a lot of times where I was at, we would get mortars come in, and some of them were duds, and so a lot of them were from Syria. They would come in and make a big hole, rockets, mortars, and they wouldn't go off. And so we would cone them off, we'd call EOD out, and then once a week, EOD would come out to the field out there, and they would bring all their unexploded ordnance and blow it up. And so I took this picture, and I didn't realize I was probably a little too close, and I think I singed my eyebrows on this controlled blast there. But those guys were amazing. They did so much work over there because in the roads there was so many mines, and it didn't matter where convoys were going. These guys had an incredibly huge job, and we lost a number of them because of detonations. Every day we raised the flag in our compound. That was me flying a flag for one of my kids on his birthday. I flew it all day and then wrapped it up and sent it to him. This picture on the right is right outside our base, and I was going out to a FOB to sit with the NMCB 24, a CV battalion, to set up a temporary base for a SEAL team. And one of the things that was ironic to me was it doesn't matter where you're at. You can go to any ghetto in the United States, or just you look down there and you think poverty. Someone had a satellite dish, and I'm like, what in the heck is going on? These guys are piping in ESPN or something out here, and you're thinking that it's just this desolate out in the middle of nowhere. But I always tell the kids that if you've ever heard of snow blindness, by the time I spent close to a year in Iraq, I had what I call tan blindness, because everything we had was tan. Everything you see out there is tan. Everything on the base was tan. They had one little strip of grass that the Army had planted, and this guy always took care to mow it. But there was nothing more amazing than coming back after being gone for a year than seeing the ocean and seeing flowers and seeing grass and the greenery and stuff. And it just it brings new meaning to take time to smell the roses, because we live in such an amazing country. We're so blessed to live here. When I got back, I was actually working with a teaching leadership, and I had lost my billet, so I went with a group called CG Classroom, and they started doing inspections on cruisers, destroyers, and frigates down in San Diego. And as part of one of our missions, was supposed to take a team down to Yokosuka, and basically a day after the tsunami happened in Japan in 2011. And so I took this team down to work on one ship, and we ended up working on 3 ships to get them all underway. The USS George Washington was getting radioactive readings on their flight deck. And so my crew specialized in some damage control fittings and water. One of the ships, they had no watertight doors. And as you know, on a Navy ship, if you go to sea, you need to have watertight integrity. And so the ship is very compartmentalized. So we had to go on board and put all the doors back on so they could get underway. But anyways, by the time I left Japan, there was no ships in Tokyo Harbor, in Yokosuka Naval Base, Japanese or American. There was 0 ships, and it was pretty amazing to see. There was like a mass exodus out of Japan. I remember asking my CO, "Are you sure you want me to go?" And he's like, "Yeah, you need to go." But basically, if you know anything about that tsunami, 20,000 people died. The Navy had a big mission over there, humanitarian mission. A lot of those 20,000 people were in the water. And so we had a lot of helicopter support. We had a hospital ship over there. And so it was a huge mission. And the resolve of the Japanese people after that tragedy was amazing. Years later, you rarely hear about it, but it was devastating. I got to go and travel and see some of the damage, and it was just devastating. I put this slide because I'm kind of proud of my son, and he's kind of my living legacy. So he's in the Navy still today, and these are just some pictures throughout his time. Up in the upper left is his boot camp graduation I got to attend. That was after I got back from Iraq. And then to the right, I actually got to ride a ship with him. He was doing he's a corpsman, so he was working with the Marine Corps his first tour. And I did what they call a tiger cruise. He says, "Dad, where are you getting for him?" I said, "Why? I'm retired." And he said, "Just wear it, bring it." And so he earned his enlisted surface warfare specialist pin. And I know Scott had mentioned that. I earned that pin on the USS Sides, and it started out, this warfare program started out mostly on submarines, and that was because the submarines, if you went on a submarine, you needed to know every job, a little bit about everybody's job, so you could fill in if something happened on the ship. And so they started it on surface craft, where you basically learned every job on the ship, from the weaponry to the operations side to the combat side to the supply side to the engineering side. It's a huge task to learn all those things, then go through an oral board and eventually get qualified as a enlisted surface warfare. And so my son did that on the USS Harper's Ferry. When I went on board the Tiger Cruise, I got to pin his pin on him, and then he also re-enlisted in that same time frame. So it was a pretty neat day at sea. The bottom left-hand corner, we were speaking at Harbor High School, which it's pretty cool. Newport Harbor High School, they have a flagpole ceremony. Actually, that's how I got involved with Freedom Committee. Frank Painborn was there, and I believe he heard me speak and said, "You need to come to our group." But at the time, I was so busy, and I think it was a few years, and I finally made it to a meeting, and I don't think I missed one since. And then finally on the bottom right, my son graduated from biomed engineering, and that's what he's doing now down in San Diego at Balboa Naval Hospital. And so I always tell the kids, you always hear about sailors that when they hit port, all they do is go out and get drunk, and that's not me. I basically always took time to go on the MWR trips, or I rode a camel in Pakistan and Qatar. I rode an elephant in Thailand. I went down the Adelaide River in Australia and saw the crocodiles jumping out of the creek for that chicken. And so, I tell the kids they're computer savvy today. And so if you go somewhere with your folks, make sure and research the history of that place so that you can go and see the neat sights. And one of the great things I've got to do since I retired from the Navy, from my civilian job, is travel our country. And I give props to my wife. She is great at finding out things for us to see and visit when we go on our trips. And so just blessed to be able to travel our country now. And so, as I tell the kids, if they didn't hear anything I said, 99% of all you do is attitude. You may not like your job or your teacher or your school or anything, but if you have a good attitude and you do your best and you try your best, you'll do well. And so I had a good career in the military. Once again, due to time constraints, I don't tell all the stories and all the places I've been. I think I figured once I did about 200,000 miles at sea. So I have a lot of sea time, a lot of shipboard time. I enjoyed my time in the service. This picture in 1981 was my first time at sea when we wore salt and pepper with a combination cover, and that's the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. And on the right was my last day in the service. I retired off the USS Midway. At the time, I was working for the Center for Naval Leadership out of a building down in San Diego, and I was like, I am not retiring from the building. And so the Midway Museum is kind of special to me because in 1984, I got to fly a mail cod plane onto the USS Midway. They were our carrier in our battle group in Yokosuka, Japan. And so it was neat to retire off there. I had folks from almost every command I ever served there in my retirement, so it was pretty neat. But the life lessons I learned is just to, always do your best and never burn bridges, because you never know when it'll come back and you'll be working for that same guy that you didn't like many years before. And but always treat people fairly, and it'll do you well. And so with that pretty much wraps up my presentation. I know I kind of tried to shorten it up a bit today, just so I could get it through. And so I guess, Scott, if you want to open it up for
A lot of these pictures before, I saw a lot of today, and there was some.
Hey, quick question for you, Gary. Great presentation. I saw that the nuclear missile you guys had a 12-mile radius.
Yes.
Was there any concern, like if you guys ever have used it, I don't know how far nuclear fallout or whatever goes. So my question is, it goes 12 miles. How far away or fast do you like turn the other way and go full speed, or what's the deal? What they tell you?
Yeah, they didn't tell us much. We were just young sailors. Matter of fact, I know whenever we were loading, they would say, now you can't tell anybody that we can't confirm or deny that we're taking nuclear weapons on, but they always had us in our fallout gear. So one of the things to answer your question, though, is, as I said, ships have what they call watertight integrity, but they also have a condition when you go to general quarters.
Okay, we're good. Sorry about that.
I can't talk. Okay, so you muted me too, Scott. But the ship has watertight integrity, but it also has, when you go to general quarters, you go to a condition zebra, and they set what they call William, circle William, and William, and they would shut off all of the ventilation. So, it's about as airtight as you can get a ship. And then they also have what they call saltwater washdown. So if we were ever to get into a cloud of any kind of a nuclear fallout, we would implore the water washdown system and set William on board the ship so that ventilation would all be shut down. And trust me, we drilled on this constantly, and it was not fun when you're in the Indian Ocean and the water temp's 90 degrees and you shut off all the ventilation. It is miserable. But hopefully that answers your question. Any more questions? I don't know if they can unmute Scott because you got muted. Tim's got a question. can't hear anybody.
Really quick, Jack had a question real quick.
Gary, can you hear me?
It's really bouncy.
Somebody's.
Can you hear me, Gary?
No, it's really, yeah. Something's happening.
Somebody's phone.
Everybody needs to mute on their own. There you go. Okay, so if everybody mutes on their own and then comes off mute as they have a question, it'll work. But Jack has a quick question.
Okay, go ahead.
Gary, we had a similar situation in the North Atlantic in a hurricane up there. We rolled over like you were talking about, and the gun tubs on the flying bridge, signal bridge, were laying in the water. And they threw the helmsman off the helm, and as he went out the door, threw him out and broke his arm. But then the wheel turned, started to spin, so we went back the other way. But we had several guys hurt really badly, and we thought we were going to lose our ship.
Hey, you know, these guys on aircraft carriers, they think that the seas get heavy, but no one can know unless they've ever been on a tin can.
Right.
It's
It's
rough.
experience. You have to learn to walk all over again.
Yeah.
Hey Gary, during your career at sea and stuff, did either you or have any guys with you or serving under you experienced where there was a lot of animus, a lot of issues, where things got ugly?
You mean just amongst the crew?
You know, one guy couldn't get along with another guy.
Yeah, all the time. It happened all the time, but you know, that's where you just need to learn to get along with people. And we had something back in the day, and they don't do it anymore, but we had something called smokers. So if you had a beef with somebody, about every couple months they'd break out the boxing gloves, put a ring up on the flight deck, and you go 3-minute rounds. And I'll tell you, there's nothing more exciting than watching some of those boxing matches at sea. And but you know, I just think sometimes it was guys would just lose it after being at sea. I was at sea probably 50 to 60 days one time, and after about 40 days at sea, people start going a little crazy. People want to go throw themselves over the side of the ship or get in fights, or so yeah, it can be difficult, but you know, there's a lot more people that are sane and understand and try and circumvent that. And so, you know, especially the skippers, you know, I'm sure Bob Olds could address that as well, but the skippers were pretty well aware of when it was getting bad. They would do things that might be fun, such as we had what they call a Steel Beach picnic. So we'd break out the barbecues, and hopefully it was a little less than a rocky day at sea, and just give everybody the day off and have a barbecue. Those were things that they did to alleviate craziness.
Ever make any pruno?
No, it's I tell you, anybody that says that being in the Navy is a soft life has never been to sea, because I know for myself personally, being in engineering, we worked 18 to 20 hours a day sometimes, continually, you know. We had Wednesday afternoons off. It was called Rope Yarn Wednesday, and that goes back to the days of sail, where they allowed you to darn your socks or write your letters or whatever. And so Wednesday afternoons were off, and then Sundays were off. But that didn't mean that you didn't have a watch, or you might have emergency work or repairs. But those at sea were about the only times you got off. And that's why when we've been out a long time at sea, and then you get to a port, man, guys a lot of times would go crazy. Didn't know how to handle it.
If I can comment on a couple of things Gary mentioned. After a long time at sea, 30, 40 days or so, the crew gets squirrely. They start bickering, they're uncomfortable with each other, and that's a real challenge for the officers, the skipper, and the enlisted leadership. For your master chief or your other advisors come in, just kind of keep the pulse of it, and a steel beach picnic was a good way that people would relax. The fires would come out of I don't know where, but there was no room to store them. The guys would sit on the fan tail and play the guitar, pretty soon they're singing. So you could really get that way, but there's a lot of leadership issues that come up that you're aware of and you have to accommodate.
Scott, I see a lot of hands flying.
Yeah.
Tim's pointing to his mute button.
Gary, when you were in Iraq, did you have Iraqi civilians on base or in your hospitals and stuff, or was it all strictly military and
No, they had Iraqis that came through a central post inspection every day. They come through, not as many as you'd think, because they had a lot of expats working there. So they had there was a lot of people from Turkey, from India, working, doing cleaning and doing some of the other tasks on the base. But they did have Iraqis on the base.
Any security issues with that?
They had.
That was always a problem.
They had a pretty big MP force there on the base. It was a very large base, and so they had a pretty huge Army MP force or Provost Marshal, which I work with closely because we also took care of all the amnesty boxes. So I would have all kinds of ammunition and things that were dropped off in these amnesty boxes. The Army guys, what a bunch of knuckleheads sometimes. I gotta tell you, they would go when they would go to leave, and they would have ammo that they knew they shouldn't have when they got there. They would dump. Most of the times they were supposed to dump it in the ammunition box, but some of them had grenades, and they didn't want to. They didn't want to turn them in, and they didn't want to get busted with them. So a lot of times they would put them in the porta pots that were out in the parking lot before they hit the amnesty. Which, I get a call from the guys that came around and cleaned the porta toilets. Hey, we got a grenade in the toilet. And it's like, really? I have to call EOD out to come and take care of it.
That's a shitty job.
Or it would be if it went off.
And then, the 9mm was hard to get over there, so I would always save that, and I would give it to, I worked closely with a Master Chief SEAL, and he loved getting all that stuff. So,
Say that again, Gary?
9mm bullets.
Oh, yeah?
9mm bullets. So I would get a lot of that, and I would always save it for the SEAL guys.
Why was that hard to get?
Who knows? I don't know.
I thought that was their, at that time, the regular armed forces.
Well, when you're that far away and you use it a lot, I'm just saying, it's you get it where you can get it.
Yeah. You didn't say much more about your convoy duty. Were you drivers or were you gunners on those trucks?
We had both. We had, our jobs mostly was bringing out supplies to set up temporary FOBs or forward operating bases. We did that, and then anything in and out of the country we were inspecting and getting out where it needed to go.
So you can appreciate.
Boys, they always had security. They would always have security. They would. I don't know what your specific question was, but we would definitely have we had a lot of training on that.
So you could appreciate then, like in Nam, we were just in an open Jeep with a 60.
Yeah.
Or some of our guys would put metal around the Jeeps, but then they had a tendency of tipping over or couldn't keep up with the convoy.
Yeah.
So they kind of prohibited us from doing that. And then we had gun trucks, but they were deuce and a halves with metal plating around them. But that was mostly the trans command, not the MPs.
We had the regular Humvees that didn't have any of the armament plating on it, and that we used that just for around the base. And I had like an old heavy truck.
I'm on the Zoom conference in Greg.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, Dave's getting his food. Tim Richards is saying he's still muted.
I'm working on it.
Anyways, I had an old Chevy truck. It was a 1985 diesel. It had a stick shift. It was pretty neat to drive around. But the first time I drove around the base, and I got shot. I thought I was getting shot at. I ducked, and I was driving really fast. And all it was, they had a shooting range for the SEALs on the back side of the base. And I didn't realize it. I thought I was getting shot at. But I think one thing about being in Iraq, and I was as guilty as the next person, was complacency. You know, when you start out, you're wearing your flak jacket and your helmet all the time. And by the time you've been there for a while, you get lazy and complacent where you shouldn't be. And so, you know, honestly, I had those 26, I call them my kids, even though that's not proper. But they were kids. They were all kids, and they were my kids. And so when we take mortars every day, I would always have to go around and make sure everybody's okay. You know, and I can honestly say that in my time there, I was just thankful to get through the deployment with no one getting hurt. And we had, I also was a senior Navy enlisted guy on the base, and so I had pretty much contact with anybody Navy personnel, and I had a guy that was working, he was a fire controlman, and he was working with what they call the CRAM or the CWIS, close in weapon system. And but anyways, he was outside of his command post, and they hit a mortar hit, and he took shrapnel through his hand. I tried to get him a Purple Heart, and they wouldn't give it to him, saying it was indirect fire. And I'm like, I just can't even believe it. This guy's going to go through life with a hole in his hand and in a war zone, forward deployed, and they wouldn't. But I thank God for those CWIS or the close-in weapon system. They called it CRAM because they were mobile. But what they would do is track the mortars and try and shoot them out of the sky. But just like I said about the people that were battling against us, they figured a way around it. The trajectory of the mortar, if it went high, they could shoot it out of the sky. So they just started shooting them straight across to come into the base.
Hey Gary,
Yeah.
I've got the chart, I got the plug that you made me. I want to mention to everybody that thanks to Gary, I've got this flag from my squadron, the squadron that supports the president on the helicopter service. This
You're welcome.
flag was handmade by Gary, and I'm very proud to own it. Thank you, Gary.
You're welcome, Victor.
Gary, I want to compliment you on your medal rack. When you mentioned one medal, I'm curious about the word for E. I see the letter E on ships.
That's a battle efficiency. And so I can speak to that in the fact that the ships I was on go through inspection for everything from gunnery exercises to navigation to any operations. And they were awarded, the best ship was awarded the E. And so in my tenure, I think I got it 5 or 6 times as being one of the best ships out there on the water.
Congratulations.
I know for me, you know, being in engineering and damage control, we did a lot of drills and we had a lot of inspections. Before a Navy ship can go to sea, they have to be deemed as ready. The only way it can be deemed as ready is to be inspected. And they had things such as ref tray or refresher training, in-serve, to make sure that you're just ready to go. But during these inspections, you were rated against all the other ships in the fleet. So hopefully that it's one of those awards that's a unit award. So hopefully that answers your question, Tim.
Yes, thank you, Gary.
And I was telling about my grandpa and showing him his little medallion picture and the picture of the. Well, if you go on their website for South Coast Shipyard, they have those pictures on there. I never said he could have them, but he stole them from me and put them on his website. But yeah, it's pretty neat. Another neat thing, I actually found I found my grandfather's old chipping hammer that he used to weld with, and he had his name engraved in it, but the welding chipping hammer was rusted over. I shined it up and found his name was on there, so it was pretty neat to find that as well. He went on, if anybody has been around Newport for any amount of time, he went on to, he ran and owned and ran the bait and tackle shop that was by Will Wright's ice cream parlor across from the Reuben E. Lee on Coast Highway. And so
The Reuben E. Lee.
that's what he did after the war. I know when I was growing up, it was called Roy's Bait and Tackle. But I know my brother Bob, he definitely visited down there. Has some good footage of him from the, I think, 1952.
Hey, Gary,
Yeah.
you might tell them about that their dad and granddad are both buried at that cemetery.
Yeah, my parents and grandparents are buried at Harbor Lawn where we had our Memorial Day. So I know that's pretty special to be able to go out there. So.
Ronnie Geyer has a question.
Number 305.
In that burger.
What's this question, Ronnie Geyer?